Well, hello, everyone. I am so excited about this day because we are finally getting on a call together to talk about working from home in the insurance industry and the future of remote work within insurance. Now, we're having this conversation right in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, but I'm guessing that there's a new normal coming that won't look like the old normal and hopefully won't look like what we're dealing with right now. But Matthew had this great idea. Why don't we talk about this, about what we see in terms of trends within the insurance industry? And so I wanted to get this specific group together to talk about this because I just think this is the think tank on this. So Matthew, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So really quickly, my name is Matthew Struck. I've been mostly in the insurance and risk management industry for about 15 years now. I'm a partner at a retail broker, independent agent based out of New Jersey. And a lot of what I've really kind of felt my passion was within the insurance industry specifically was embracing technology, which is definitely vogue right now, in vogue. And the other aspect of it was just what kind of, huge positives can come from that. One of which being diversity and inclusion and, kind of that human capital aspect to it. So I'm really glad we were able to get this together. This is fantastic.
Thank you so much. And Miss Deidre Wright.
Hi, Amy, and hi, everybody. I'm Deidre Wright. I'm the founder of Strategic Stories, LLC. I basically help leaders achieve business and marketing goals through visibility coaching. And why am I here? You're probably wondering. Well, I'm actually a second generational insurance professional. I work for Marsh and Aon as a broker. Then after that at Business Insurance Magazine, heading their Diversity Inclusion Institute. And when I was there, I was working 100% remote for about 2 years. And so I come from the standpoint of someone who worked in the industry at an office and then 100% remote, and want to share kind of my experience and the opportunities that people can have by embracing this as a new norm.
Thank you so much, Deidre. And Bobbie.
Hello, everyone. My name is Bobbie Shrivastav. I'm a co-founder and chief product officer for Benny Kiva. And the reason I'm so glad you guys invited me to join in on the conversation, because our company is, we embrace remote. We have been since we launched. We do have offices, but with this whole pandemic, for us to move completely 100% remote is kind of like in our DNA.
And you're not just remote, you're remote and global as a small business. You have people everywhere. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. We have 4 offices. So we have offices in Nepal, we have offices in Armenia, and then an office in Des Moines, Iowa, where we're headquartered, and then an office in North Carolina, where I'm at.
I love the breakdown of Nepal, Armenia, Des Moines, and North Carolina.
My second home is Des Moines, so.
That's awesome. All right, so thanks everyone. So we've got the U.S. covered. We've got up and down the Eastern Seaboard. We've got West Coast. I'm in the Midwest, and I wanted to just kind of throw out there, remote work. I'm going to tell a story real quick, actually. So I was working for a large carrier who shall remain nameless, and I was working with people. I didn't work with anybody in my own office in Indianapolis. Like everybody I worked with was on the East Coast or the West Coast, and I decided I'm just not going to go back to my office. Like nobody will know, nobody will care, right? Like I'm not going to ask permission. I'm just going to do it. Do not do this at home. Like if you're listening, do not try this at home. But this is what I did. So for like months, I just didn't go into the office. I just worked from home. And then they instituted this thing where you had to report what your remote versus in office time was, because they were trying to do some like real estate, I think math, right? And they were taking offices away because I had worked so hard to get to this level, to get an office. And then they were taking my office away. I was like, I'm just not going in. Like, I just don't want to go in anymore. If I have to sit in a cube, I'm not going in. And because I really like to focus and whatever. So anyway, I didn't go in for a long time. Well, then I had to report that I wasn't going in. I didn't want to lie. So I put 100% remote. And my boss calls me. He goes, you don't have permission for that. I said, oh, I didn't know I needed permission. And he says, well, I really need you to go in the office. And I said, okay, why? And he didn't have a good answer. And so I was like, I'm not going. He didn't work there. I was like, I'm just not going to go. So I didn't. And then some things changed, and I applied for a different job. And when I was interviewing for the job, the new job within the same company, the manager said, well, you'll be working with people who are in home office. And I said, yeah, that's fine. I do that now. I said, I just work 100% remote. She goes, oh, okay. And I totally made it happen. So for the last 3.5 years that I worked there, I worked completely remote, unless I was traveling for work. But it was I kind of snaked my way into it, but I loved it because I got so much more done. And so, Deidre, I know you went from kind of the same thing where you were in the office all the time, and then you went 100% remote. Can you kind of talk about your experience in doing that and how you came into that world?
Right, that's a really good thing to bring up. So it's also depends on your manager. So although I worked for a global company, my manager did not believe in working remotely. Other of my colleagues' managers did. So it was more on an individual basis, which is, I think, the problem with that, because I felt like part of my career, I guess, part of why I wasn't growing as fast as I wanted to because of that issue. And I say that from the standpoint of that I'm a single mom. I'm very ambitious. I like to do things, but sometimes I physically can't be at the office, or it's not worth it. My commute's over an hour. So to go and commute for an hour, pay, to be on public transportation, get there, then go back for a 2-hour appointment for my son just didn't make much sense to do that. And I had other colleagues who would just, travel for various reasons. I had one that would go to a lot of weddings. He's in that age group with a lot of friends. But because his boss believed and were working remotely, he was able to advance in his career because he's able to work from anywhere. And so I say this story to illustrate the fact that just because you're in the office does not mean you do a lot of good work. It just means you're physically there taking up space. And so companies, I hope, if nothing else, you get inspiration from this experience and also understand it's a crisis versus a regular working situation. But think okay, if these people are operating at this level during a crisis, imagine what they can do during good times and give them the autonomy. And when I got recruited to work for Business Insurance Magazine, they were set up to be 100% remote. Everyone just worked from home because, most of the employees were reporters anyway. So they were either visiting places or just locally writing. And I actually preferred it. I will say this. Whenever you want to contemplate having working remote relationship with your employees, give them clear structure on how to onboard, expectations, communicate, regardless whether you're at the office or not, just communicate and things will be fine. But also you have to think about with the whole D&I, diversity inclusion implications. Okay, does the person have space to afford office space? Because if you're in an expensive place, like I'm in the Bay Area, you don't actually have extra office space or whatever. Also, it's going to be extra cost for a premium internet service because you can't operate at regular speeds. And that's extra cost. And do you have a stipend for your employees? So I have an experience and I enjoy it. And I think going forward, I'll always want some kind of remote component to it. But these are things you have to think about is how do we create more equity when it comes to working remotely and not more divide in some aspects.
Absolutely. And that leads me into, I wanted to talk to Bobbie about that because, I, having come from a rural area in Southern Indiana, my parents still can't get broadband. They cannot download or stream videos at all still. So it's not always right. There's a real gap there. And so Bobbie, I know with your company being, literally across the globe, what kinds of hurdles have you seen, or how is that, where does it equalize and where does it exacerbate the differences?
No, that's a great question. So what a couple of things that we've instituted, what Deidre was discussing, from an expectation perspective, we to make sure everybody is working, we invest a lot in their infrastructure, right? So when they are working right now, everybody's working from home when they're in Nepal or Armenia, but when they're when with normal times, we give them that flexibility. But for some folks, they enjoy that office space. They're just used to that norm, right? So how do you give them that opportunity where you can have structure, you can go into a space, and then if you have flexibility to leave early, go home, take care of things, or even work from home. Like we're right now, like in North Carolina, we're completely work from home. And the way that we've managed our team is, for the folks that work in North Carolina, we do weekly check-ins. They come to my house and we just have meetings. Not right now, but they were coming to my house. We do a lot of virtual events. So you know how right now, like there's a lot of like Zoom connections, like, but we've been doing that ever since we have meetings where we're, you know, drinking tea or drinking our beverage and just having a good conversation. So we've kept that community going regardless of where you're at, so that people feel a connection. It goes beyond work.
Absolutely. Thank you, Bobbie. And Matthew, I wanted to ask you, because, you know, a lot of people say, well, you know, sales is an in-person kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Like you have to have that human connection to do sales, and you have to be, you know, you have to be able to handshake and that sort of thing. Well,
Yeah.
Right now in the environment that we're in, it is impossible, in many cases illegal, to make those kinds of face-to-face connections happen. So how are you experiencing this as a member of, you know, a customer facing, you know, deal maker?
Yeah, I think I'm kind of lucky in that. Look, a lot of us can consider ourselves lucky in certain circumstances into which, you know, we're born into or we find ourselves in, right? I mean, the fact that all of us find each other in America is like hitting the lottery, you know, from the standpoint of, you know, the pretense under which we could be born or where we could be living right now. I think I lucked out in that, you know, you've done some talks on generational kind of like differences and things like that. I consider myself one of those, and I forget which newspaper came out with it, but there was that in-between generation, right? The Xennials. And I consider myself a part of that kind of like, you know, sandwich generation, in that, you know, I remember what it was to not have internet, and to kind of almost be a latchkey kid where you would go outside and play after school until your parents got home from work. And then I also remember, you know, getting my first cell phone and AOL Instant Messenger and everything like that. So I've been lucky in that I've kind of been able to see both sides of it, right? And I see the need for the personal interaction when it comes to sales. But there's also this newly emerging trend. I mean, you see it with certain types of consumerism out there already. Amazon, I made a post on Facebook the other day. I know it's not like the most sensitive thing to say, but I was like, new conspiracy theory. I think Netflix and Amazon started this whole pandemic issue, because if you look at their stock prices, I mean, it's like through the roof, right? Where everyone else is suffering. But the consumer is different nowadays. I think it really came full circle when we first started, myself and my business partner, we both worked for larger agencies before starting this one. Before starting Treadstone, we wanted to be 100% remote. We wanted to be completely, and for financial reasons too. We saw, you know, during downturns in the economy, you saw big companies have to let go of a large amount of staff or sell off property when it was the worst time in the world to try and sell off property because of the overhead costs. So we just wanted to be 100% remote. So the first 3 months I spent in Starbucks after we started, you know, our agency. I now have a co-working space because I think it was to Deidre's point, maybe having that nice little kind of corner to go to occasionally is nice. You know, you don't have the family yelling in the background when you're on a video chat or anything like that. But yeah, I think the consumer is different. So the first policy I ever sold was on Facebook Messenger. It was obviously I wasn't going to retire on it. It wasn't like a multi-million-dollar deal, but that was kind of when the light bulb went on that, you know, all right, we can actually do this. We can make this happen. So yeah, it's a changing environment. I mean, the one thing, Bobbie, that you came up with, and I think that's really interesting, I would love to ask you about, is the fact that you have a workforce that's spread out. How do you deal with like time difference, right? So time difference is a big deal. We had like someone that we looked at bringing on board from Phoenix, and even that was a big deal because it was like 3 hours difference. So we're starting our afternoon and she's just basically getting going in the morning. I mean, how do you manage that? Do they work nights in Nepal and you guys work the day, or how does that work?
So in Nepal and Armenia, they're working their own time zone. We respect that. What we've done though is we've actually shifted the way that we work. So instead of, I mean, I have a 5-year-old right now. So, and with, so I'll bring up this example with the pandemic, right? So I have to homeschool her in the first portion of the day. So my day doesn't get started till 11.
Oof.
I lose a lot of amazing productivity because I'm a morning person, but it's just our schedules are shifted and we just go with the flow.
Yep.
So what, even before this, what we were doing is, we would just work in a way that we were supporting our Nepal team at nighttime or our nighttime. So they start work like around 9 o'clock our time, Eastern. And so we, if they have any questions, we're available for a couple of hours. And then we have good tooling. So we use Slack. So as soon as they have an issue, we see it. So we respond. And then towards when they are ending their work, is our early portion of the morning. So I have staff that have scrum calls with them at 6 o'clock, 6:30 in the morning, but that's when their day is starting. So the staff that's here. So that's how we've been able to accommodate the time zones. And Armenia is in this like really cool in-between bridge between Nepal and US. So we've just made it work, but it's taken a lot of the earlier part of the days where we would just work all day and be like, this is not working out. So we had to really create boundaries and space for us, but it's really worked out really, very well that neither team feels like it's a balance. Yeah. Sometimes they are in calls with us at 10 o'clock in the morning, which is 10 o'clock at night for them. But that it's a trade-off, but the benefits outweigh the cons.
Yeah. No, I think that's interesting. And I love the fact that there's such a broad, cross-section just within your organization of not just time zone, but like, culture and like the different types of people. I think one thing you mentioned, Deidre, was you really have to kind of put yourself in the position or ask the right questions to understand what that person that you're, empowering to work remotely actually can do, like what resources they have at their, their beck and call, so to speak. I mean, have you found that you predominantly work out of your apartment because you can find that space? I mean, you're in San Francisco, or do you have to defer to like a WeWork or some kind of other type of environment for, certain pieces of it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've always just worked out of like, my apartment or my home. Primarily, I've tried others, but I don't know, just out of habit, I was just like, okay, let me have my routine where I make my, my tea, then get ready. And it just depending, it's different because when I was working for a company, now as an entrepreneur, it's different, because it's really my day. And then to put things in perspective, most of my clients before were based in, the East Coast or Midwest. So my day started earlier, but I had to balance it between my son and taking him to school. So, now it's kind of like open. It's my opportunity to kind of seek out all kind of clients, but they happen to be on the West Coast or in a international, and they had an earlier start than me. And so I say that because I think you have to think about when are you most productive and when is your clients able to be reached, and then who are your strategic partners and how do you want to communicate with them? Because I find that honestly, I operate better like in later part of the day. And so I'm like, if I don't necessarily have to be up early doing work, because I'm homeschooling my son too, and it is a transition, I'll tell you that, then I'm like, let me just not try to stress myself out trying to do work in the morning when I'm like, it's not going to get done or it's not going to maximize my time. So I think there are certain things you can do. And I tell people, like, if you're new to working remotely or your team is, I like to say, have the GROW method, which is set your goals, create a routine, have some outreach way to kind of connect with people so that you can communicate what you're doing or see how they're doing, and then have some kind of wellness factor. And that can be both mental and physical. Like it was Brendan Burchard said that most people who are productive, they typically take breaks between 45 and 60 minutes after doing some kind of work, like literally just getting up, standing for 2 minutes. that can help make you more productive, and it just gives your brain a break. And so you don't have to necessarily be at WeWork to do that, but you need to move your body if you're able to, or take a mental break, because people are getting burnt out right now, and it's giving them really bad impression of working remotely when I'm like, this is not the norm. And I don't know if I can just pose a question to you guys, since you guys are working still in the insurance industry or aligned to it, how have your strategic partners communicated how they're, engaging their employees and continue to service you during this period? Because it's a big undergoing from them, but are they reaching out and communicating to you what their plans are or how they're working through this?
I can go from, we, so Benny Kiva helps carriers with claims. We have a claims solution, claims platform. And when we reached out to our clients to say, hey, how you guys are doing, honestly, for them, it was business as usual for the departments that are using our software, because we're cloud. They didn't have to worry about how do you transition. But then on the flip side, when we talk with our prospects, right, because you still have to continue to foster these relationships. They're still wanting to talk. They want to reach out. What we've seen is, they're struggling. For folks that are on the servicing side, on the claim side, they're in one scenario, they've taken a department they've been in lockdown. This is overseas, and they had to move jobs over because those folks can't go to the office to do their jobs. So now they are transitioning a huge amount of work into on-site in midst of this. So I think from an insurance industry perspective, they are trying very best to figure out how to work from home, but some of those legacy processes will continue to be a crutch for them until they can, I think hopefully after this, they really move forward with their digitization strategy instead of just talking about it, is where you guys have been there. So, a lot of good talk, but no action, and hopefully we'll see some action.
That's harder to press those function keys on a laptop, isn't it? I'm sorry, I can't, there are so few COBOL jokes anymore. And people that get them, but the insurance industry still gets the function key.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. I guess, Matthew, on your side, have you heard any kind of communications, whether it's been officially or unofficially, or how transitions are going with different partners?
I think one of the talking points or things that we kind of brought up before we got together on this call, I forget if it was you, Deidre, that brought it up, or Bobbie, but the question of, how things existed before this whole pandemic situation, and then, what it's going to look like in the future, or, kind of what's happening during. I mean, this during is very reactive. I think we're seeing throughout, and it's not just the insurance industry. It's like you can look at just life in general and see a lot of the shortcomings. Like, for one, this is a little off topic, but one of the takeaways I think that this illness is going to highlight is the fact that, you talk about that wellness component of working from home. A unhealthy population is the hardest hit by this disease, right? I think the same can be said about business practices, right? The companies that were best positioned to be remote work, at least, amenable to remote work, are faring the best here, right? A lot of the folks that we deal with so as a broker, like, I have two sides, right? I talk to businesses that are purchasing the product, and then I'm coordinating with the carriers that are selling them. I would say that some of the carriers, it's been seamless because they've been doing it this way for the last 10 years. And then the problem is, for most carriers and a lot of the wholesalers I work with, they still lived in a world of fax me the signed application. And I'm like, you realize we're in the 21st century, right? Like, this is not the way this is supposed to be. I'll send you a punch card in the mail. How about that? That's not the way it's supposed to be. So I think you're seeing that, there was a lot of work that still needed to be done across the board as far as those things go. But, a lot of folks, if they were caught behind the 8 ball on this one, they're just kind of backpedaling. I think the other problem that we have is regardless, I don't want to get into a political discussion because it's not productive typically in any venue, but the leadership that we've seen across the board has been very spotty because there hasn't been any kind of consensus, right? It hasn't made you feel like things are under control. It makes you feel like, tomorrow's another day and there could be another change and we're just going to have to deal with it and kind of live with whatever the changed world is tomorrow. And so I think a lot of that could have been helped with some level of consistency, and that can be said about the technology component of it. And I don't want to take too much air out of the conversation, but living in New Jersey, we lived through Superstorm Sandy. Superstorm Sandy, most areas in New Jersey were without power for a week plus.
Sure.
You had a lot of people that were scattered and working remotely, and even still, companies didn't embrace the idea that I work in risk management, a strategic risk management principle is this idea that you always need a plan B or a plan C or a plan D. Well, come this pandemic and we still don't have plan B, right? Or plan B is still kind of a mishmash of what we reactively put in place from the last, crisis. So, I've kind of lost sight of the question here a little bit, but I think that's kind of the state of it in terms of the communications that we're getting on the broker side.
Okay. Oh, I have one question and I want to turn over to Bobbie.
Can I jump in on the last one though first real quick?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Sure. So, my work is primarily in the event space now. And I've seen a lot of conferences that have postponed indefinitely. I've seen a few go virtual. And so it's just an interesting time because, like the worst time to start to really launch both feet into an event business is when nobody can have an event. So that's been a lot of fun, right? But I'm learning so much, but it's curious because I've seen, like, for example, NAMIC has pushed out just indefinitely, right? They've got these like 3 events coming up in April, May, maybe into June, although I don't want to say that for sure, but I know at least through May they're postponing their events. And then they're considering, since we don't know, to Matthew's point, we don't know when we can do these things again, so it's a matter of, do we postpone or go virtual or both? And so I think there's a lot of change happening there, but, some of the companies that I'm working with directly are doing the same thing, right? Where it's like, we know we need to train our employees. We know we need to educate people. We know we need to support people and invest in our folks right now, but we're not sure where the balance is of just putting people on Zoom calls all day, right? Because people get tired. You get fatigued of being on calls all day, on video where you're looking at yourself and you're like, man, I don't know about this.
Well, what about the lack of support when it comes to someone who never had to do something like this in the past, right? I mean, we're lucky in that probably all 4 of us have had experience with this, but I've heard horror stories of employees that have been told, well, here's a laptop and Zoom, go ahead. And they're like, what?
Well, and some places don't even have laptops to give you. Like, if you're not set up to work from home on your own, you're out of luck. So, I mean, there's a huge divide, but I think that, we're all kind of trying to figure this out. And I think that, just the first few weeks, what I saw was companies were worried about things like cybersecurity, bandwidth, scalability of their networks, like some pretty basic stuff that they haven't had to think about before. And then when you think about within the insurance industry, when we talk about like cyber exposure or, just all of the exposures that we have, right, from that perspective, it's like things got, there's just all these complicating factors. I talked to somebody the other day she owns a small business. She does compensation consultations for organizations around, compensation and benefits. And she was working to install firewalls. She had just set up a new office. She was working to install her firewalls, and she can't have people come to her office to install firewalls and all of the server software. And she was smart because the first thing she did was get on the phone with her insurance company and say, look, I'm trying. Can you go ahead and underwrite the cybersecurity policy for me, knowing that I can't get somebody in here until, maybe June to actually do the work. And so she worked with her agent to get it done.
Mm.
But it was, you know, but she was smart. But I don't think a lot of people are thinking of those things right now, but they need to be. And I'm sorry, Deidre, I wasn't trying to cut you off, but it's just an interesting, like, I have a little bit different perspective. And I think it's interesting how people are kind of like covering basics, but then they're already thinking about, well, when can we get back to normal? And we just don't know.